not enough to get them to
Right. I guess
to
that
slow down
to
behavior.
your point, what we talked about previously, the pathological part of the addiction,
Right.
or the situation where they try to compartmentalize or try to fuse together having a marriage relationship and having or balancing their sexual addiction at the same
Yeah,
time, which
exactly.
cannot happen.
Yeah, you'll usually find some sort of compartmentalization that a lot of this becomes secretive, it becomes shameful. Don't feel, it's that's another consequence is a betrayal of your own personal values, or you're doing things you never thought you would. So there's some serious consequences. And you said something important before too, is for many people they might have this thought, and we call them cognitive distortions that we'll
Right.
work through, is that, oh, I'm just looking at pornography, I'm not really hurting anybody, I'm not actually having sex with anybody, or
So
what
there's a sense
who's
of justification and
yeah,
realization.
yeah, who's it hurting? I'm just taking care of my needs, and maybe I'm actually being better because I'm not bugging
Right.
my partner or my wife with my sexual needs. And so you'll hear those kinds of things. When in reality, most partners, a lot of the studies out there, most partners feel betrayed by their husband or partner looking at pornography, if that's not part of their coupleship, if it's secretive, and there's a sense of betrayal similar to what they would feel if he, and I'm saying he, but if he or she was acting out outside the home.
Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's the second of the three criteria, the three main criteria. But you'll see escalation involved in there, where it keeps growing more and more and more, maybe withdrawal and irritability, when they're not engaging those behaviors. And then you'll also see the third one would be a preoccupation or obsession. So
Right.
most of their life is now consumed by either getting some sort of sexual activity, managing what they have, or trying to deal with all the consequences of this. Maybe the lies or the compartmentalization. It takes a lot of energy. There's really sophisticated
Right.
stories that can be, that people can come up with. So
Definitely.
there's a lot of different, basically your life revolves around sex, or the
Definitely.
sexual activities.
And to your point on this one, the obsession part with the accessibility of the internet at work or at home, even in school, I know some of my clients that struggle with sex addiction. They would look at pornography during the daytime at work in their office, and
Yeah.
this is pretty much the obsession that goes on, where they would have to have that fixed no matter what time during the day.
Yeah, and I think we had talked about this before too. I don't know if it made it this time around, but we've had this discussion before. Is that the stat has shown, and I think this might even be 5 to 10 years old at this point, so it's probably even more.
Right.
But that most pornography is accessed during the hours of 9 a.m. to 5 p.m.
Wow.
So most people are looking at porn, some sort of pornography during work hours, and whether that's their 9 to 5 employees or not, that's not very clear. But 9 to 5 says something, and people oftentimes lose their jobs, because the internet is accessible completely anywhere you go, and that's without going too much into a different area. One reason why internet-based sexual behaviors become so addictive is they call it the AAA engine of accessibility, affordability, and anonymity. I don't think there's a cell phone you can get these days that at least doesn't have the internet possible on it.
Right. Definitely.
And then so it's accessible, it's affordable. You can pretty much get free. You have an iPhone, you get a free application for, pretty much a lot of different kinds of sexual
Anything.
behavior.
Right.
And then, we have a perception. We think that it's anonymous, that they can't track us. When in fact that's not true. Your behaviors online can be tracked, but we think, oh, I don't have to go into an adult bookstore, or I don't have to go buy pornography in person. I can just access it anywhere. So there's that sense of um, safety or secrecy.
Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah,
Now, Dan, I do apologize for taking us off track here.
it's fine.
The preoccupation and obsession part, go a little bit deeper than that. Could you give us an example, or kind of explain it a little bit more?
Yeah, let me think. If you're so think of someone whose life has become so consumed, preoccupied, where in programs, we'll talk about some 12-step programs. In one particular program, Sex Addicts Anonymous, They refer to this as being in, quote, the bubble. So you're sort of walking around in a kind of numb, dazed state where um, you'll often find that most sex addicts will have some sort of ritual or plan before they act out. It could be preparing their place or going to their favorite store, and there's a lot of elaborate rituals that take place. And let's just say someone who's masturbating to pornography, maybe there's a setup of how they make sure that someone's not around, or it could be even, now it's the duration. A lot of people you'll find maybe are masturbating through the night, all night, and find out, realize that it's 1 hour before they have to go to work, and they haven't gotten any sleep. That's that kind of obsession. It just becomes, you're so engrossed in the activity that you just lose track of what's going on outside of yourself, in that kind of a dazed, numb state.
Yeah, and so there's an obsession going on where if it's not met, if the needs are not met, um, they continue to ruminate about it, they continue to think about it, and they continue to plan a way to get that fix.
Well, yeah, and actually, that's for most people where they report that's the, and I shared a little bit of my experience, and I can relate that really the actual, without being too explicit, but the actual orgasm or that high that you get is pretty short-lived.
Right.
I mean, it lasts for just a little bit. So most of the intensity, most of the high is actually leading up to that.
Right.
You
And
know,
there's
the
a
act.
sense of, and you're absolutely right. I think there's a sense of attraction to deviance, attraction to the excitement, the sneaking around, the keeping the secret. I think that's also as addictive as the act itself.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and that becomes, we can, our sexuality is such an interesting thing, and it's a beautiful part of who we are. I think it gives us a capacity to relate to other people, and that's how I believe it's supposed to be used.
Right.
But we can also, a lot of things can become sexualized. Those chemicals in our brain that are so powerful with sex, something like fear or anger can be sexualized. That fear, that adrenaline that's happening, that hyper aroused state, that yeah, it can be exciting to stay there. I mean, some people will talk about shaking. It's so intense that they're shaking, and so, but after they have a climax, after it's over, the actual act maybe not as glamorous. It's a lot of the fantasy of, okay, what's this going to be like?
Right.
This time's going to be different. This is going to really meet my needs. But they find that feeling is pretty short-lived. You're trying to meet a need, like we talked about dependency, relating with another human being. You're trying to meet that need with something that's not really going to solve that. It's not going to really meet that need that you're really hungering for.
Right.
So it's only going to last for a little while. So the longer you can prolong it, the longer you can make it before it's over, the more exciting it'll be.
Wow. Okay. All right. Now the next part, you've mentioned at least 10 criteria or 10 criteria for sex addiction.
Mhm.
Just go a little bit through that, and then we'll go through I guess for the treatment for it.
Sure. Well, we talked about three of them, which really, have some of the other 10 involved in there. So let me just, I have a list, and I'll just read those. Let me see if I can find those somewhere. Oh, there we go. So the first would be loss of control. So we already talked about that. Preoccupation or obsession, we already talked about that. There's efforts to stop, which would also be involved in the loss of control, right? So that's another criteria.
Right.
Compulsive, the behavior becomes compulsive, where it's something that you're doing over time, maybe longer periods of time.
Yeah. And I think
And that also, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. I think it's also good to note that the difference between obsession and compulsion. Obsession is
Yeah,
a thought patterns, right? And
absolutely.
so
And the
it's
compulsion is
like
the
a
actual,
right, and the compulsion is that the actual behavior, isn't it?
exactly. The
Okay.
behavior is compulsive. It's something that you're doing. You keep doing that behavior, even if, in it, a lot of times it can be linked to the obsession.
Got
Yeah. Let's see, what else would be the inability to fulfill work obligations, which you had mentioned, that somehow if you're accessing pornography for 2, 3 hours during the workday, you're not going to be as productive, obviously, or you know, it's not as clear. We're all pretty clear about an alcohol hangover, right? Okay, you're not feeling so good. Well, the same thing really can happen when you've got the chemicals. This one's just a little different, where alcohol is a depressant. It slows your body down, and you feel a little different based on the chemicals in your brain. Sex and sexual activity is a stimulant. It keeps you up. So you might find someone, it could be more similar to cocaine withdrawal or something, where they might be irritable, cranky. They might just be in a numb or dazed state afterwards. So you're not going to be as equipped to work well,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And then continuation despite negative consequences, which we talked about before, is another one. Escalation is another one, which really I think goes into um, the loss of control. But you need more and more of a hit to get the same kind of fix. You need more of those chemicals to help you feel even the same way.
Wow.
Um, and then the other part of escalation is withdrawal, which we talked about as well. And then the last one, the 10th one, would be losses. So you've had certain losses, even if some people have, they call it a low bottom. They have a rock bottom that they hit, and maybe have lost everything. Some people don't, but even at some basic level, you've lost connection with yourself. That compartmentalization. If you're compartmentalized with this, at some point you're no longer connected with yourself, and that's a huge loss. That
Yeah.
are we're not meant to be so separated
Right.
and having these different parts. A huge shameful secret side, and one we show the world. That's a big loss, even if
Yeah,
it's
and
just that.
to just to add on that, one of the complaints that some of my clients have is that loss of control and the loss of self. I
Hmm.
think that
Hmm.
is more detrimental. You're absolutely right. I think that's a huge loss when somebody feels like they're not themselves anymore.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Let alone the losses in relationship trauma that partners can experience, that the family can experience.
Right.
There's just a lot of losses and consequences that can happen,
Yeah. So
and it's
there's not
really
only
painful.
external losses like family members, divorce,
Yeah,
property, a job,
yeah.
but there's also a loss of spirit in the self.
Right, STDs, spiritual losses. I mean, just that loss of connection with yourself, or your higher power, with God. I mean, that these are pretty major losses um, so to say that this is just a joke, or that people really, if you could see the pain of individuals that come to see me, there's just so much pain that's involved.
Right.
It's not a fun thing. People have
No.
lost a lot.
No. And it's to your point, it's really unfortunate that our society really make light of this or
Yeah.
even disregard it in general because you're absolutely right. The loss is I mean it's huge.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess Dan, my next question would be now we know a lot about sexual addiction this far, and we know the criterias. We know how one becomes hooked on this stuff, and how sex can turn into something beautiful, then becomes pathological in a sense. Um, let's I think let's go with the treatment or some of the help that people can find with people that are watching our conversation today.
Hmm. Sure. And there's some good news and some bad news.
Okay.
The bad news is, right now, like we talked about, not only in society but in the professional, in the medical community, psychological community, sex addiction isn't a recognized disorder yet. It's not a diagnosis yet. So unfortunately, most insurance companies won't pay for any kind of sex addiction treatment. That's just the reality right now. It is hopefully changing. There's a new manual coming out, and so there's research going on for it, so it's being more recognized. But that's the bad news. Right now, a lot of treatment is expensive to get good, solid treatment. But I personally believe that it's an investment. The money that you spend is invaluable for all the losses and the pain. That I really think that um, you know it's really worthwhile to go
Absolutely.
through this. And I personally, again, this isn't. I would rather be out of a job and not see the pain, but I want to be there to help people. So
Right.
anyway, that's kind of the reality right now. So that's the bad news. But there are a lot of ways that you can get help. Some of them are inexpensive. There's some creative ways to do this too. So the first thing I would say is if someone has questions, if you have a question, if am I a sex addict, or do I have